I would like to thank y'all for having me here tonight. And before we get started, how many of y'all in the audience have actually been to the Etowah Indian Mounds? All right, so how many of y'all have not been to the Etowah Indian Mounds? It's a very popular place here in Cartersville, and I would say it's probably one of the oldest tourist attractions in the county and in this area. The first person that we know that visited here would have been Elias Cornelius back when this was part of the Cherokee territory in the 1800s, and the Cherokee took him out to the mounds and showed it to him, and he wrote about it. Prior to that, this was Creek territory, and so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit, is about the repatriation that's going on at the mounds to the Muscogee Creek Nation of all the artifacts that were excavated out at the mounds. So I'm going to guess that that goes forward. So all of this started a very long time ago for some of us. For young kids that show up at the mounds, it was a really long time ago, and for other people it wasn't quite that long ago. But way back in 1990, President Bush, the Native Americans, and a lot of other people that were in Congress, they got together and they nailed out this law that we refer to as NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And basically it gives the right to Native Americans that are associated with certain sites access to their ancestors and things that were buried with their ancestors that were taken out of graves pretty much without their permission. Basically, anybody familiar with the old Indiana Jones movie? People in the past, archaeology is not like it is today, and hopefully it will continue to improve. But people used to take things and without asking anybody. So you can read this up here, but there's quite a few tribes that are associated with different places, but it's only federally recognized tribes that lay claims to these. So of the several state recognized tribes, they basically have no recourse at this moment, not through NAGPRA. And I'm not the expert, so Raelynn may know more, and if you have questions, the very last slide will show you who to contact in the state of Georgia that's a little bit more versed on this law. But Etowah in the Muscogean language basically means tribal town. I just knew it meant town. So there's actually several Etowahs around the area. For y'all that are familiar, there's one up in Tennessee, near Benton, Tennessee. There's one over in Alabama and several counties that are named that. But all of this led to, with the Native Americans, this was their land, and gold was discovered, and other, people wanted their resources, and so it basically culminated in the 1830s of laws being passed that forced them off their land. And most of us are familiar with the Trail of Tears, but with the Muscogee, they refer to it as the Road of Misery, or Road to Misery. And you can see that the 5 tribes that are basically associated with the creeks, you got the Muscogee Creek Nation, the Thlopthlaco tribal town, the Alabama Cosarte tribal town, the Kalagi tribal town, and the Porch Band of Creeks. All of those are in Oklahoma except for the Porch Band, and they're over in Alabama. And so there's a lot of excavations that took place in the state of Georgia. I can't remember the guy's name, but around 1851, late 1850s, he wrote basically a tour guide that took you to places within the state of Georgia, and he mentions Etowah Mounds. At that time, it was referred to as the Tumlin Mounds, because after the Cherokee removal and the Creek removal, the Tumlins here, they won in the land lottery that happened at that time, the land near the mounds, and accumulated other land up and down the river. And in the early 1800s, 1880, 1881, there was a huge flood. It washed out a lot of graves, and Washington, D.C. sent the Smithsonian down. And after that, we see a series of things happening. And if you can read up here, that middle one with the big circle with the do not, like the Ghostbusters, no sign. It is at the back of a card from W.K. Warren, who excavated it, or not Warren, I'm going to forget his name, Moorhead. He excavated a lot in this area, and actually up in Pine Lock, he was going to excavate around the Cora Harris house, and she called him a looter, and she actually concreted several caves shut so that he couldn't go in that had burials in it. But you see also that in the past, you see the mound builders, people were trying to, back into the 1700s, to disassociate the mound building culture with the Native Americans. They were actually referring to giants and people that may have come across from Egypt, and other things, and not the Native Americans themselves. So a lot of different things happened there, and we ended up basically, Etowah was just far enough away from the I-75 corridor and the railroad track and highway going towards Alabama that it was protected. And then finally, in about 1953, you see the Georgia Historical Commission was purchasing several places that are now state historic sites. So Etowah, the Chief Van House, and Neochota was all being purchased at about the same time. I've seen documents, I believe they're preserved at the University of Georgia with writings. So the Tumlin family, they sold to the state of Georgia part of the land and then gave some more land to the state of Georgia. And within just a few years, they built the mound up there. And if anybody's been out there anytime lately, you can tell that the little museum is a lot bigger now. It's been added on to over the years until basically we've ran out of space. And of course, it was filled with artifacts that almost all came out of Mound C, which was a burial mound. So it was really disrespectful in many ways, even though those artifacts were very fine pieces of artwork that the Native Americans created a long time ago. They weren't necessarily always given the respect that they should have. So on that little card on the previous page, it basically said, if you find artifacts, give the guy a call and he'll purchase them from you. So a lot of the artifacts found in this area are scattered all over the country, some of them in private collections, some of them in institutions like the Smithsonian, the Peabody Museum, different places over the years and moved around. But today, the Office of the State Archaeology has partnered with the Muscogee Nation to basically any excavations, mostly ground penetrating radar, magnetometer work, with the Muscogee Nation and the universities, so that we're now in compliance with the law, but also we're showing a little more respect. And you can see there, let me flip a few pages so I'll lose track and start talking about things. So we got a little history there on the law. Passed in 1990. I don't remember if I was in high school or college at the time. That was the same year that I graduated, but everything had to be cataloged. So we had old catalogs that were handwritten, and they just converted them into more handwritten stuff, and then eventually it's been digitized here more recently to make things go a little bit easier. But there was over 404 human remains dug up at Etowah, and all of the artifacts from each of those graves are trying to be put back with each one of the people whose graves were disturbed so that they can be reburied. And that will eventually happen, most likely at Etowah. And you can see that there again, 404 individuals, and that's a minimum. So, you basically, sometimes a grave, they don't last, everything in the grave. So but they were disturbed. And more than likely, maybe Mound C, but we're not sure. Raelynn may have a better idea of the idea behind that, but it's going to take several years to put all the human remains back with the artifacts that were dug up out of the graves. And once that happens, there will be some type of ceremony, and it'll be closed to the public, so it'll just be the Muscogee, basically the descendants of the people being reburied. And then here's the press release where we let everybody know what was going on. So that was dated back in December, and basically the artifacts were just removed in January. So that was a little bit later than I was expecting. I was expecting it to happen before Christmas, and it took a little bit longer to get everything in line to make that happen. But we did, the park, we closed off the museum for several months while we were doing this, so that we could remove everything, catalog it, box it, and make sure that it got over to the University of West Georgia in good shape, into their climate controlled storage, so that nothing was damaged in the meantime. And we are redesigning the museum, so if you were to come over there right now, there's not a lot in there. We've got a fish basket replica and a replica canoe that was built back in the 80s. I have been building a new replica canoe. If anybody's been watching on Facebook, the progress on that, it'll eventually, we did float it in the river last year, and we're hoping to put that in the museum to replace the other. And the Muscogee Nation is going to give us some things to put in there that's more modern. A lot of children, when they come to the site, they do not understand that the Native Americans are still alive. A lot of the younger ones especially, they don't have the concept of time enough to get it. It's like I've actually had one of them ask me one time, why did I kill the Native Americans? It's like, well, that was a long time before I was ever born, and they're not all dead. They're still around, and I have to remind them of that they're, now in Oklahoma mostly, but there are still several thousand Native Americans from various tribes that live in the state of Georgia. Not all Native Americans live on a reservation. So eventually we will have a lot of new stuff in the museum. We're still working on that, and we're basically waiting on some grant money to help fund some of the projects that is going on. But in the meantime, I try to remind everybody that the mounds themselves we try to treat that like the museum. We try to keep it mowed and in clean shape and all the trash picked up, so that people can see what the Native Americans, what people built, 1,000 years ago, a little over 1,000 years ago, before they left it, 500 years ago. And of course, that's a picture of our sign. It now doesn't say closed. I put a piece of tape over that because we do have it open. It just doesn't have a lot of stuff in it. And that was taken back in January when there was no leaves on the trees. And so if you have questions about the actual NAGPRA and what's going on, you can talk to our state archaeologist, Rachel Black. Now, some other things that are going on at Etowah. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the projects that we do have going on, so that in the future you may want to come out there and try some of it. We're going to try to do a big puzzle to show the trade map. The Native Americans back then traded all over the country. Our old signage literally stopped at the Canadian border and at the Texas-Mexican border. They probably traded a little bit outside of that. We don't know exactly all those places, but we do know that they were getting, tar from La Brea tar pits. So you can look at really old maps and you can follow the rivers. It's like they probably walked across the desert in lower California over into the New Mexico area, and then once you get out there, there's a river not too far from the Arkansas, and you can jump on the Arkansas in a canoe, or at least follow it for a while, and end up in Texas. And then there was obsidian that was found from the Yellowstone area. So jump on the skip and jump and over on the Ohio if you want to paddle upstream. Otherwise, you float all the way down to around Natchez and walk some of the what we would think of as highways now. I think it's Highway 20 that goes in that direction versus Highway 41, the old Tennessee highway going from Miami up through this area all the way towards Chicago. So lots of things that we want to do with the trade map. Want to focus on the river more because the river in this area was the lifeblood of Native American travel. It watered their crops, it watered the animals that they were eating, and so we want to focus on the agriculture and hunting a little more, and basically the lifeways of people living in the past, but we also want to make sure that we're tying it to what people are doing today. So we'll have a weaving station, hopefully, where people can learn some Native American weaving techniques, and we'll have some more modern artwork, and that's a good thing. What time are we at on my talking? I don't want to go too long and not leave Raelynn. 7:23. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for me before I turn it over to Raelynn?
Were the artifacts photographed before they were sent over to the university?
They have been photographed in the past, and my understanding is it's probably going to be some more professional photography taking of them. Some of the artifacts will be visible by photographs. A lot of it, Raelynn can answer better, but I think a lot of it, because they come from a grave, they're not wanting to actually show images of them, but instead some of the stuff will have replicas made. So
The question was, for the museum, will there be the replicas and the photographs at the museum, to the extent the photographs are permitted?
with what artifacts they will let us show, they'll have some. And then, of course, there's some artifacts like the 2 statues. They had replicas of them made, I don't know, 20 years ago or so. And my understanding is they will be coming back to the museum as soon as a space is made for them. So we're going to basically try to bring things in a little at a time rather than just some one big grand reopening type thing. Any other questions?
Is any of this going to be state funded, or are you guys, in terms of the reimagining of your museum, or you guys relying totally on going out and funding?
It is to some extent state funded. With the NAGPRA, there's actually grant money that was put back by the federal government and I think partly by the state years ago, and so it's basically laying in wait to be utilized at different places. So there's not just a huge amount of state-funded museums, but it also includes all the universities that may have stuff. So Emory, University of Georgia, anybody that may have a small collection that would have to file through NAGPRA and the stuff be returned. The boxing up and returning would be funded by those grant funds, and whatever the state may chip in from one year to the next to have that done.
So have the human remains been removed as well?
They're still, the ones that I know of are still in storage at the University of West Georgia. There may still be some at other locations.
And are the human remains as well as these funerary objects going to all come back and be reburied at Etowah? Is that what?
That's my understanding. However, Raelynn will be able to answer that better because it's really up to where the Muscogee Nation wants to lay them to their final rest again. Most likely it will be at Etowah, but they may have another location that they want to return them to somewhere in the nearby area.
So how does that change, or maybe not change, the responsibility of you folks at Georgia State Parks and Historic Sites in terms of what you would be overseeing if they're actually buried there at the site?
Well, I've seen other locations where human remains were reburied and a big monument was put up, and so we would be in charge of upkeep of the monument. I have to remind everybody that Etowah is still full of human remains. I literally treat it like it's a national cemetery when I'm trying to mow and stuff. It's like, try not to scar the ground. Remember that there's still hundreds of houses left unexcavated with human remains buried under the houses, not to mention the other 2 mounds that weren't excavated probably may have some kind of human remains, even if it's only 1 or 2 people somewhere in it. It's a sacred space. So we're still in charge of maintaining the security on that sacred space and trying to keep people from sneaking in, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's part of our job. And so it pretty much otherwise stays the same. That is almost a trick question. We know that they seem to have been abandoned in the mid-late 1500s. However, the Cherokee, when Elias Cornelius went to the mounds in, I think it was 1817, he mentions that there were dilapidated buildings on and around some of the mounds, and the Cherokee at that time said that they had been basically hiding out at the mounds at a recent time frame. So, late 1700s, very early 1800s, we're not sure. To know that, we would have to know exactly which one of those houses were from that time period, and there would have to be some kind of carbon dating done. But for them to be standing, in my experience, that wattle and daub hut that you may have seen in the drawing on that first page, it was built by Carl Etheridge, Emmons, Spain, and a bunch of volunteers in 2006, 2008, and the roof was falling off of it when I interned in 2010. So those houses, if nobody's living in them, they don't last very long. Yeah. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Raelynn, and there she is.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Let me pull up my slides. Can you see the slides, or do you see notes, or both? Both? Let me change the view. How about now? Just the slides? Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Raelynn Butler, and to introduce you in a more traditional way, in the Muscogee language, I'll say Raelynn Butler, Jalo Jifkados, Omalegida Wakoki, Almadowa, Pakan Tallahassee. That my name is Raelynn, and I'm from the Raccoon Clan, and I'm also from Pakan Tallahassee Tribal Town, which in English means peach ground. Last location was on the Coosa River in Alabama before our removal almost 180 years ago. I'm happy to be here tonight to talk to you all a little bit more about Etowah, but also our repatriation efforts at the site. But I first want to start with a little bit of Muscogee history. And so just to jump right in, Muscogean people are descendants of mound builders. For a long time, Europeans, early folks didn't know who built these mounds, and actually had thought that Vikings did, and it really took the work of the amateur archaeologists and others who started excavating and digging into these mounds. Even Thomas Jefferson dug into a mound that was on his property, and they start finding these artifacts and burials, and realized that these were made by Native American people, indigenous people of the United States. And so, there's been a lot of thought about who built these mounds and when and why were they different time periods occupied and times where they're not occupied, and what happened to mound building culture after Europeans come in the historic time period. But I just want you all to know that our oral histories, our traditions, we're taught that we are descendants of the ones who built these mounds. We treat mounds as very sacred places. They're very important for our religion and culture, and they're the physical representation of that. When you look at these mounds, and if you've been to visit the mounds, you know, you may need to take a break going up the first flight of stairs. You know, it's quite a way up, almost 6 stories. You know, having baskets of dirt and soil, you know, almost like an assembly line coming to pile up to create and build these mounds. But you also got to think about the labor that it took to do this, and, you know, with no dump trucks, no nothing like that, and even the baskets, how much river came and materials had to be harvested to make so many baskets, how much people it would have taken to build these mounds, but also how much food had to be prepared and cooked to nourish and feed the community who are building these mounds. And so when you think about the labor of love and why would they be built, it really boils down to religion. You know, when you believe in a higher power and you believe that there is something bigger than yourself, you look at civilizations across the world who have built monumental structures and who have come together for the purpose of religion to create these things. And so why did we do this? This was very religious, special, sacred place that, you know, today is still a part of our culture. There's cultural continuity from these mounds to our present day people. And unfortunately, because we were removed, people aren't aware of what we still do today. And honestly, I don't think many people care that what we're doing, you know, in the privacy of our ceremonial grounds today, which is fine. We're not in the business of telling everybody, you know, because it's not a powwow for Muscogean people. But basically, just want you to know that these mounds are very important and special to our people. And mound building didn't stop exactly at European arrival. We've been working with the University of Georgia in Athens and doing some research, radiocarbon dating on the Oconee River, on the Dyer Mound. Found that mound building continued at least 150 years after contact. So this was not a practice that just, you know, Europeans came, we got sick with disease, and tried to hold on to everything, religion, language, and we have tried desperately over 1,000 years, despite everything that has happened to us, to maintain that. And so, yes, we had a lot of loss of life at contact, but we very much tried to maintain this way of life. But when you're constantly being attacked or at survival, I'm sure you've seen some shell mounds. They can also be stone mounds and sand mounds. And oftentimes they are burial mounds, but many were residential and did have different purposes of the mounds. Some of these pictures here, the top one is of Etowah, the second one is of Moundville in Alabama, and the third is at Okogie Mounds in Macon, Georgia. The bottom picture is actually our governmental building here in Okogie, Oklahoma, where I'm coming live from. This is where our modern day government handles our district court, Supreme Court, but also where our National Council, which is equivalent to like Congress, comes and legislates and has laws and carries out, the nation's business. So, in this example, that mound building is very important and critical to governance of our people. And so mound building architecture is still used, and even at our ceremonial grounds today, we have much smaller mounds and mainly made of ash, but there are still mounds being created. And really all of this boils back down to this mound building time. I'm glad to see that so many people in the audience have been to visit the site. I think it's a wonderful site. It's one of my favorite places to come to in Georgia. But here's just a little map showing where Mound A, Mound B, Mound C, and then the three other mounds that are harder to see at first glimpse. But 54-acre site. There's 6 mounds total, and this is just a little map. I really like this picture, even though it's strange to picture it with so many trees, because unfortunately I didn't get to go when the trees were gone by the time I got to come and visit the site. But it is a national landmark, which is important. It's the highest level of protection or acknowledgement of something that is so significant and has national significance to American history, not just Native history, but to American history. Again, luckily we got to learn a little bit of history about this Tomlin family earlier. So it is thought that DeSoto came to visit this part of Georgia and was at Etowah. And so I'll show you a map. But also about 20 years later, another Spanish explorer of their journals mentioned Muscogee tribal towns being in this area. This is a potential, or estimated or thought of to be map of where DeSoto went through when he came through the southeast. And this is a picture of him. And then the bottom right picture is really just, I wanted to zoom in here where you can see the Etowah River here on the map, and where there's a town here called, I guess you might say, Etowah. But if you think about Etowah, and how we say it in the Muscogee language is Etowah. That's how we pronounce it. Etowah and Etowah. Those, I think the Spanish speakers and Muscogee speakers trying to communicate during that encounter that they did the best they could, and it is thought that is where DeSoto came. And there's a lot of other, like I said, Muscogee towns, even up in eastern Tennessee. There's a lot of Muscogee words throughout here, and connections to modern tribal towns that were part of the Creek Confederacy later on, but even that are still existence today. In Oklahoma, we very much have many aspects and communities within our nation that still carry on our culture and life ways. Most people know about Creek Indians or have heard about us through the Creek Confederacy. And that was a very powerful confederacy. You'd say the strongest force in the southeast, composed of hundreds of different tribal towns, which we call Etowah. And this is really the most important unit politically, and culturally. So when I introduced myself, I told you that I had a clan in my tribal town. And that's really the basis of our identity. And we inherit that from a Muscogee mother, your clan and your tribal town. So every citizen today in our tribe can trace back to one of these towns. And really, Etowah is thought to be one of the mother towns of all of the nation. And so that our ancestors were here at Etowah, and as they left the site and, go on to more our contemporaneous sites around Carter's Lake area, Little Egypt, which is thought to be the Coosa chiefdom, which is another big area that DeSoto and the Spanish explorers visited and talked about how powerful it is because they are having come to visit our community or really involved tribes in our history into their work. And so, there is still a Kuzamiko, and that's a leader at one of our ceremonial grounds. And the oral history goes all the way back to Kuza. And very much connections from Etowah, the Kuza chiefdom. But these towns are very important. There's a lot of kinship that is involved related to clans, but also, a lot of folks are intermarrying with these towns in the Confederacy. And each of these towns have its own government structure. They have their own chief, second chief, council. They have their own women's leaders. They have their own doctor or medicine man, and things like that. And so they also have their own laws and regulate themselves. So it was very much almost individual tribes from these towns. Some people were not even speaking Muscogean language who were a part of the Confederacy, like the Shawnee and the Yuchi. And today, we have 16 ceremonial grounds that remain as a part of these ancient tribal towns or Etowah. And they carried those fires that burned there, the sacred fires, all the way on the Trail of Tears, or what we call the Road of Victory, when we were being forcibly removed in the 1830s. This map just shows where the Upper Creek tribal towns are. It may be hard to see, but all of those words are different towns that were documented along the Coosa, Tallapoosa, and Alabama rivers in Alabama. And here in western and central Georgia, along the Chattahoochee River, the Flint River, the Wogie River, down into the Altamaha, but then also, also important, and then the Georgia coast. Again, all of this is happening. People, Seminole people, Guali, all of these are related to Kitchiti, Muscogean groups and towns. These are the land cessions here in this map. So the red one is the first one we had with actually the crown, the British, before the United States was a country, and we, each one after that is ceded territory. As you notice, northern Georgia is not marked, and either northern Alabama, and you don't even have Tennessee or parts of South Carolina or North Carolina here, but very much was Muscogean territory all over, the southeast. It's just that by time we are negotiating with Europeans coming into this territory, these are the kind of documented areas defined during that time. We very much lived in northern Georgia and along the Etowah River Valley before the Cherokee come down into this territory later in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And so unfortunately we don't have a treaty that proves that, but it's very much thought, even support of archaeological artifacts and work that these are Muscogean towns and communities that are living in these areas. And actually there's a lot of Etowah connections into eastern Tennessee at Hiwassee Island, another big archaeological site, mound site there on the Tennessee area, Tennessee Valley. But also here's a list of treaties. You could spend an hour talking about each one, but really, the main story is over 28 different treaties in 133 years, where almost every 10 years we're being forced to move. I know how hard it is to move even just today. I'm sure people do not enjoy having to move. Imagine having to uproot yourself and your family and your pets. We actually have a lot of pets and dogs as a part of even Etowah times. So, it's a very tough thing to have to relocate or be forced to move constantly. And in such a short amount of time, a lot of change, a lot of people And you know, and these treaties were all broken. They were guaranteed that the state or even the government was going to ensure that encroachment didn't happen on our lands, but that did not happen. You know, once the crimes were happening or homes were being taken, there was no police force there to protect the natives or tribes. So it really was very much a very tumultuous time and a lot of uncertainty happening. The first treaty we had with the United States was the Treaty of New York in 1790, and it was actually signed by the first president, George Washington. So our nation and people have been negotiating with the government. You know, our government is actually older than the United States, and I really like to tell people this because people don't even know we exist anymore, and I want people to understand how powerful, how important, and how that government-to-government relationship played out in not just Georgia history, but American history. This map shows the removal routes. So these peach area here on Georgia and Alabama are also treaty lands, and majority of the tribe was brought to Fort Mitchell, Alabama, on the other side of Fort Benning, and were forced to be removed by land, but there were some that were removed by boat, came down into Mobile Bay, Mobile Point, and then went through the Gulf and up the Mississippi River to get to the Arkansas River. And some of those were prisoners of war. They were chained and handcuffed to these boats. And there were at least 7 different detachments of forced removal. Each detachment had about 2,000 plus people. And you know, how long do you think it would take to walk from Alabama to Creek Nation in Oklahoma? Does anyone have a guess?
9 months.
9 months? That's a pretty good guess. The quickest was about 4 months, but it took people much longer than that because a lot of them were leaving in August and arriving in winter time in January, February, and didn't have the clothes or blankets needed to survive in that type of weather. And but it's thought that 4,000 Muscogee people died on this forced removal, and even additional 3,000 more died after arriving just because they were so sick when they got here. And that the lands were not bountiful or plentiful. You know, the trees didn't grow as tall, the grass didn't grow, we didn't have the same hunting potential. Our medicines, everything was so different from what we were used to living at. So it was very hard to re-establish and start our life in Oklahoma, or at the time, Indian Territory. I show you this map because this is where the Muscogee Creek Nation has done research and feels that, based upon oral histories, archaeology, linguistic evidence, all of these different factors, this is a footprint of Muscogean people. This is the areas we hunted, we lived, we thrived, we utilized to support and sustain our way of life over all time frames. So not just during mound building, not just during the Creek Confederacy, but since time immemorial, that these are the areas. And of course, some of them are, after removal and in post-Civil War occupations in Texas and Kansas, and then even our reservation in Oklahoma, removal routes through Arkansas and things like that. But really, this is what we consider to be the footprint of the Muscogee Creek Nation. I will also say it does overlap with many other tribal boundaries, so we're not trying to say that we're the only tribe that lived here. It's mainly that we give this map to federal agencies, military bases, Forest Service, Park Service, so that they understand that we care about cultural resources, artifacts, burials that are in these areas, and that we want you to consult with our nation on how to protect them. This is our current leadership. We have Principal Chief David Hill, Second Chief Dale Bieber, a picture of our National Council. We have 16 members on the council, 2 from each district on our reservation. And then we also have pictures here of our Supreme Court justices. Real quick on this, today we're the 4th largest tribe in the United States, and there are over 574 nations. So we have almost 100,000 people. I think we're at 98,000 this month. And so, you know, the nation is constantly growing. And like I said, 4th largest, you know, who's larger than us? The Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, the Navajo Nation, and the Choctaw Nation actually are the other 3 large ones that have more than us. But we're very large and have a very modern government, but also a strong presence within our community here in Oklahoma, and have really tried to reconnect and let people know who we are and that we care about our homelands back in Georgia and Alabama. I work in the Historic and Cultural Preservation Department. We're one department of 80, you know, and the tribe employs almost 4,000 people. So we are very much big into the workforce for our community. But in our department, you know, our goal is to protect and preserve all Muscogee history and cultural resources for future generations. And that's a wide variety, but it also includes mound sites. We have about 16 staff, and I really appreciate them. They've helped us do all kinds of work. And we're all in different various parties. So we have our Tribal Historic Preservation Office that really is set up to work with federal agencies on protecting sacred sites. We do archaeology for the tribe. So if we're going to build a new clinic or facility, the tribe is going to do a cultural resource survey on that property to make sure that we're not impacting graves or other cultural sites that were here before we got here. So, you know, there were tribes that lived here in Oklahoma before we came, and so a lot of times if we are finding artifacts on our land, it belongs to them, the indigenous tribes of this region, and not us, the southeastern tribes. We also have NAGPRA, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. And then we have our cemetery preservation program. You know, the protection of graves is one of the most important things and parts of our culture. And I think is why we're also so active in NAGPRA. But we care deeply about protecting the sanctity of the dead and feel that they deserve to be respected and not messed with, you know, for any reason, and that we will do everything we can to try to protect them. We also have the National Library and Archives in our department. We have here in our building the library. And then we do a lot of cultural outreach activities. So moving into NAGPRA, we really only started having a full-time NAGPRA person in 2017, and Mr. Edmund Spain is our NAGPRA officer. But we've been doing NAGPRA work, which is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, since 1999. And actually, we've been coming out to Georgia since around this time too, and started conversations, I believe, in early 2000s regarding Etowah and Muscogee Mounds and repatriating ancestors from there. To date, we participated in 40 reburials in 6 different states within our area of interest. And so, what does that mean? We've helped rebury 890 ancestors, over 71,973 funerary objects. And what does that mean? What do these numbers mean? So when these ancestors were buried at these mound sites or at any archaeological site, people who loved them and cared for them had a funeral. They had a service to lay them to rest. They mourned. They carried out all of the burial practices of our people. And even today, we still put their favorite objects, their favorite food in with them in the grave. In a casket, you'll see that. That's still part of our culture. And so these funerary objects are basically shell beads or different jewelry items, adornments that were part of their clothes. It could be their favorite weapon. It could be something, these are the types of things that were found in these graves when archaeologists dug them up. And in our culture, when you place those things with your loved one, they become a part of them. And so that's why we want to rebury those items back with the person they came from. And if you think about it, this is really a human rights issue in terms of, no one would want your early ancestors or family members, even if they're overseas, and you find out that your whole family cemetery has been dug up and all of their war medals or all of their teeth are now on display at a museum. And you had no knowledge that they did this, no outreach or permission to display those kind of things, and really a lack of respect that they're not treated the same as any other race or any other people. And so that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in, is that we had no idea that people kept digging, until they uncovered 400 graves, and that those people have been sitting on museum shelves for over 80 years. Some of these people have been on the shelf longer than they were alive on this earth. And what the NAGPRA does is allow tribes to make a claim through the law to get them out of museums and to allow the tribes to rebury them. Some of these remains were so fragmented, they were already decomposing in the ground. And now are just really small flakes of bone of a person that are sitting on a shelf and that have been studied. And, from our tribal perspective, enough is enough. People have researched them, have written books about them, have gotten PhDs. We want them to go back at rest and go back to the earth where they belong. Yes, we have learned a lot from their lives, and it has helped us build the field of archaeology, but it's also time for them to go back. They've done their duty, and without permission. Today you have to have permission to have access to your own medical records, or for your family to access your medical records. But for some reason, for Native Americans, their remains and their bodies have been exposed and donated to science without ever even asking anybody. So this is heavy work. But I want to show you a snapshot that this data comes from 30 years of the law. There's still over 66,000 Native American ancestors that are sitting in museums, and only 13 museums. A lot of these are highlighted to be in the southeast, just to show you that, unfortunately, the southeast is behind in repatriating these ancestors back to tribes. And it's not always the fault of the museum or institution. It's also that tribes haven't made claims yet, or haven't been made aware that these collections even exist. The cultural side of this is very difficult, because when we explain that, hey, this museum has 400 ancestors that are sitting on shelves, they act like it happened yesterday. Why would you go and dig up a cemetery? And we have to explain that, well, this happened in the 1940s, or this happened in 1950s. But it doesn't make it hurt any less, trying to explain why so much excavation happened of our graves. But also, it's very sensitive work to rebury ancestors. Only certain people are taught to take care of them or be around human remains. women are not supposed to be. So it's a very cultural, logistical concerns about actually going and because they deserve to go where they were excavated from. Also, pictures of human remains and funerary objects that to us are inappropriate without consultation or permission from our nation. And you know, I think a lot of people feel like, oh, we're not going to be able to see this or that. But I'm telling you, there's millions of other artifacts that were not in a grave that we can show you and that you can see. So it's not 100% of everything is leaving, you know, nothing is going to be seen again. It's very much, we just want to respect those graves and those items found with people who were buried. That's just part of our cultural respect for the dead. We also do not want DNA testing done or any kind of destructive analysis on our ancestors. Also, you know, the soil that's around those bones is also part of their grave, and we consider that to be a part of their, the person. Moving on to more Etowah repatriation, and I'm sorry I've talked a lot, and I know if people have to leave, but I just have a few more slides. You know, it's been decades of work for our tribe to track down these excavations. Right now we know of 11 different museums and institutions across the United States that have Etowah remains and funerary objects in their collections, and this is a list of those institutions. So we have some in Massachusetts, several places in Georgia, Washington, D.C., at the Smithsonian, University of Michigan. We even found out there were some here in Tulsa, where I live, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Illinois, Nebraska, South Carolina, and even New York. And really the question is, how did they get there? I don't know. I have no idea how these collections got to these different institutions, other than Etowah was such an important site and such a unique site, and people loved these burial objects so much that they had different archaeologists around the country coming to visit, or archaeologists were sending them examples or parts of these things they were finding. But that in itself has been hard to track down everything. This is showing how many ancestors and items that each of these museums have. So we know the Robert S. Peabody Museum has 105 ancestors and over 24,000 funerary objects. In Georgia DNR, mentioned today, 104 ancestors, over 187,000 funerary objects. The Emory University has 2 ancestors. Smithsonian, we really don't know, but we estimate that they could have hundreds, for sure, probably thousands of funerary objects. We had submitted a claim in 2021. The Smithsonian doesn't follow NAGPRA law, so their repatriation is very timely. We've heard it can take 5 years for a request to be considered. So to break all this down, there's a total of about 516 that we know of that have been documented in these 11 institutions, over 212,000 funerary objects or personal belongings. We estimate there could be 50 to who knows? Who knows? There's several of these places that haven't finished their inventory to know what kind of numbers we're dealing with. We've been very active at Etowah. We have spent 6 field seasons working with Dr. Adam King, who is a well-known archaeologist that's done quite a bit of work at the Etowah site. So we were there 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then most recently in 2013. Here's a list of staff that all got to participate in that field school. And it's really neat to see these names, and I'm going to show you some pictures of them at Etowah to wrap up. This is in 2006. In the red shirt, we have Tim Thompson. He was our traditional cultural advisor. Johnny Jacobs in the middle, and in Spain on the right. This is Timmy Thompson using the ground penetrating radar machine to help document unmarked burials and structures under the ground. Here is Timmy on the river in 2007. I really love that picture with the fog. Here is when the tribe came out to help build that wattle and daub house in 2008. There's Emmett and Timmy. It's also kind of funny because I said, did you guys build all that? And they said, no, they just asked us to do that corner for a photo op. But I still think they get credited for helping construct the whole house. But these are pictures from that time when it was being built back in 2007 and 8 time frame. And then the most recent work in 2013. But, you know, our folks got to be hands on the ground and work with everybody, and they really enjoyed it. Just a few more pictures. And I really appreciate your time. I didn't think I'd talk so long, but I'm open to any questions you may have. And you can always email me or call me if you'd like to follow up another time.
Thanks, Ray. What questions do we have?
Do you know why the Smithsonian is not, that doesn't have to follow NACRA? Like, why are they exempt from that?
You know, I think it has to do with the Smithsonian, you know, being like a government, well, I don't, to me, you know, the Smithsonian thinks of themselves as like the highest museum or like repository in the country. And for some reason, they just weren't a part of that legislation for NACRA law. But they do have, they follow another act called the NMAI Act, and it does allow for repatriation, but they do not have those same kind of timelines and inventory requirements that NACRA law does. So, and they recently amended some of their policies too. So they do repatriate items, but again, they don't have is very different process to go through and request that.
Trey, Raelynn, great job. It's good to see you again. I'm Jim Langford. I used to be on the DNR board a few years ago, and I've been working with Raelynn and Keith and others because we got an idea to, and in fact, it was Diane Tate and Steve Taylor, the county commissioner, asked me to 2 years ago to try to figure out a way to create a big new museum of some kind for Etowah, and whether that's helping, you know, DNR one way, or doing that in a private way, where we raise private money to do that in a private facility. And that's the direction that we've been in. And we're still working on that. And we don't, Raelynn doesn't like to call it, I don't either, museum is kind of a word that people continue to use because we understand what that word means. But I think Native people are not happy with that term particularly because it means that people don't want to exist anymore. And so we don't want to do that. So we're calling it Museum and Ancestral Culture Center to broaden that horizon in terms of what it might include. And it's a long introduction to my question. But Raelynn, you might talk about the artifacts that are not funerary objects, the ones that are you reviewing those too? Is your staff reviewing those as well? And thinking about how you might, because I assume that DNR is going to let you be in control of those as well. Is that right?
Yeah, you know, we don't want the shelves to be empty. You know, we feel that there's plenty of stories to tell about our ancestors at Etowah. You know, there's a lot more about the pottery and the foodways and the different trade networks. And we are working with Georgia DNR on trying to help incorporate more of that history and stories. It's really wanting less to focus on burials and grave goods, and trying to look at the community as a whole. For some reason, archaeologists had always just focused on the burial side of things, and I guess it's related to because they found these outstanding artifacts with them, but there's also so much else that was found at these sites and those stories haven't been told. And so and we also have a lot of contemporary Native artists, and we want people to feel proud of Etowah and the history and the people who live there, and that we also want them to know that we are still here. And I think that's the biggest message is, unfortunately, people don't know about our tribe today, and we want people to make that connection when they leave the park that, wow, this place is still important, and there are many tribal people who continue to work to protect and tell the history and connections to this land.
Well, let me just put in a plug for the First American Museum in Oklahoma City, which I think is really cutting edge. It's fairly new. And I got a chance to go out and see that recently, in the past few months. And it is spectacular without focusing on burials. It's just so many.
Yeah, and like we have had some of our artisans even do a dugout canoe, and I think it'd be great to have something like that. Even let people come and watch them make this canoe and harvest the tree, and let people participate, and then even help go and test it and float it along the Etowah River. That would be really neat, and I think help bring our culture to life instead of sometimes I think seeing things behind a glass or in a museum setting. Sometimes people think that that's dead and gone, but we really are not, and we are strong people, and we want people to know that. And so we really have some ideas about how to make things a little bit, more hands-on and interactive and include the tribal community. But I would say, we're very grateful to Georgia D and I for all their hard work for maintaining this site and taking care of it and educating all the young kids who get to come and the families who come and visit. And we really appreciate Georgia D and I working with us on this. It's been a long time coming, and we still have an estimate of maybe 3 to 5 years before the inventories are done or completed to actually do the reburial. So it's a very timely process, and even for remains down in Muscogee in Macon, Georgia, took 15 years to work to get them back from different museums, and the Smithsonian too, they had some there. And so it's a long work, and it's sometimes tough because I don't think anybody likes to go to funerals, and that's really what our work is and job is to help rebury these ancestors, and so it's sad, but it's also very rewarding to know that we got to help put them back. And even our partners who help us always feel very much thankful and glad that they were able to have a part in helping them go back to rest.
Well, let's give Keith and Raelynn a